A lot of times on this show, all I'm really trying to do is get two very disparate groups of people to understand each other. A lot of times it's misunderstood, and I've certainly gotten some emails to show me just how misunderstood that can be. But that's usually what I'm trying to do. Either two massively different religious groups, or religious people and non-religious people, sometimes just liberals and Republicans. And while obviously I try very hard to stay away from politics in a lot of ways on this show, trying to get those two very different groups of people to understand each other is pretty important. After all, to some extent or the other, we all probably fall into those two groups, or perhaps both of those groups, like myself, who tends to kind of try to balance between the two, even though I know I tend to wind up more liberal. And very often, in trying to understand myself and in trying to understand other people, I try to understand, why do I feel one way or the other. For instance, I don't tend to be very nationalistic. Nationalism is essentially a belief in your own country as a sort of entity. And you believe in it, and you believe it's right, and you believe that it's better than everybody else. Or you might not necessarily, but that's in general kind of nationalism, put very loosely. You'll find some people who just think America is the greatest thing in the world, or whatever country you happen to be from is the greatest thing in the world. I don't. Does that mean I hate America? No. In fact, the more I think about it, it's simply that a certain mindset has less of a tendency to identify with their country. I personally don't particularly identify with my race or my planet. I personally am one of those people who tends to say, okay, well, why do we think we're any better than the animals? Why would we think we were any better than the aliens if aliens showed up or something? Why do people from this country think they're any better from people from that country? Now, the reason I bring this up is because I don't feel in any way that one way of looking at things is better than the other, but I do think it's important to understand why. I remember years ago, I had a really good friend, actually he's still a good friend of mine, but we used to hang out a lot more, and we had a bit of a falling out. And he was a film director, I was working with him on films, and we butted heads a lot. We had different ways of looking at things. And finally, I just said, I don't want to work with you anymore because I have problems, and it was kind of a stupid falling out. I feel bad about it in retrospect. I wish that things had gone very differently. But in looking back, I realized that what really was coming between us was a difference in ideology. You see, when he would receive a letter about his film, he would send the film out to various film festivals and such, and he would get letters back, and the letters would say, well, really, this needs work, and this needs work, and I don't know about this, and I don't know about that, but this was really good. Okay, when he would get a hold of that letter, he would immediately show it to me and go, wow, they thought my movie was great. And I would say, what do you mean you thought your movie was it was terrible? They said this, and this. And he said, yes, but they said this, and this. They were obviously saying both things. His tendency, however, was to only listen to the good stuff. Was I any better? No. The truth is, all I listened to was the bad stuff. Because that's the way I am. It's the way I am as an artist. It's the way I am as a person. I say what's wrong. I want to fix what's wrong. I don't want to concentrate on what's right. And in many ways, I think this is a separation between nationalistic and non-nationalistic people, which often winds up being a separation between liberals and conservatives. I recall seeing another video where some conservative talk show host was just ragging on how horrible liberals were because all they believed in was that America was awful and everything America had ever done was awful, and they were just these horrible people because of how terrible they looked at America. And I looked at that and I thought, wow, that's not even true. Now, of course, the reason I know that's not true is because I do tend to be more liberal. I'm not nationalistic. And while I don't tend to look at America as being the greatest thing in the world, it's not that I think of them as a monster. And while I tend to be very critical of the government, it's more that I'm critical of government. I am critical of the way governments wind up functioning. And I don't necessarily blame it on America. It's not that I'm saying, well, the American government is so much worse than other governments. It's not what I'm saying at all. I may look at another government and say, well, you know, they're doing better than us in this way. On the other hand, we also have governments that are doing much worse than us. I'm usually criticizing the function of government and the way that certain personalities wind up doing better in government, and therefore we wind up with corrupt people. And people that are not necessarily out after the interests of everyone. But what all that is an example of is the way I see life. I tend to look around me and say, what's wrong? What's wrong? I want to correct what's wrong. I want to get rid of everything that's wrong and make it better. If it's right, I'm not looking at it. Whereas, as the more conservative, the more nationalistic view, when people who have that perspective, that personality, when they look at America, they look at everything that's right about America, everything that's great about America, and how could you ever say anything horrible about America? In the end, we're actually both talking about abstractions. There is no America. I mean, what is America? Is it the land? Is it the people? We're a pretty disparate people. Is it the government? Is it the politicians themselves? Is it the bureaucrats? Is it the civil servants in between? What makes America America? And obviously that is something you could debate and debate and debate forever. But what we're really talking about is an abstract ideology. Some people want to look at America as the greatest thing in the world, and so they point to every good thing about America. And there's wonderful things about it. I could look at probably, I would hope, every country in the world, if I knew enough about every country in the world, and I could name what was amazing about it. But it is just as absurd to not recognize all the horrible things we have done. Yes, we slaughtered the Indians. Absolutely, we did that. We took the indigenous people and we murdered them and shoved them onto little reservations. The ones that survived, the ones that were left. It's one of the most horrible things anyone has ever done. I'm not trying to compare it to other horrible things. Well, it's not as bad as the Holocaust. But the point is, we have done some pretty horrible things in this country. And my personality is to recognize that. Because my personality is, we never want that to happen again. And I think that tends to be the liberal mindset. And I think often liberals and conservatives could certainly get along a lot better if they would simply come to realize that they were talking about two different things, that they were concentrating on two different things, and that the ideology they're looking at in nationalism, in America being the greatest thing or being the most horrible thing, is just an abstraction. And it's part of the reason it's so hard to get people to talk about real problems, real solutions. Because we do banter back and forth abstractions. But I guess to some extent that's just humanity. And trying to figure that out is part of Omnism, whatever that's worth. I'll see you guys next week.